First of all, how many of you all have been reading Pat Conroy for a long time? See, in fact, I was telling him tonight, I'm kind of new to that. I was walking, doing my exercise one morning, listening to NPR, and Pat was on one of the morning shows, and or the morning NPR program. He was talking about his book, My Losing Season. And I was just bowled over. I just thought he was fabulous, and just started going back and reading everything about him. It seems, I was thinking about it earlier, it seems like we know him because he puts so much of himself, his family, his friends, his experiences in his book. I mean, he's the eldest of 7 children, 5 boys, 2 girls, born to a Marine colonel who was a pilot, and his father was from Chicago, his mom from Georgia. We learned a lot about his childhood, about moving from military post to post in his book, The Great Santini. Then we got wrapped into his life as a cadet at the Citadel, reading the Lords of Discipline, and as I say, my personal favorite, My Losing Season. He started his writing career as a student while he was there. His first book, The Boo, was it was a tribute to a beloved teacher. After he graduated from the Citadel, he taught English in Beaufort, South Carolina, then took the teaching job on the remote island in that one-room school that we learned about in the book, The Water is Wide. That grew out of that experience. The NEA, the National Education Association, gave him a humanitarian award for it, and Hollywood made a movie out of it as well called Conroy. In '86, he published The Prince of Tides, about a dysfunctional family that was based loosely on his relationship with his sister, and Barbra Streisand starred in that movie. Later came Beach Music, and just before South of Broad, there was the Pat Conroy cookbook with his favorite recipes and stories of his life. He was inducted into the South Carolina Hall of Fame earlier this year, but all of his books, as you read his books, it seems he uses his life, his experiences so much that we seem to know him. He lives on an island in South Carolina with his wife, novelist Cassandra King. And tonight, we are indeed fortunate to have with us to talk about South of Broad, Atlanta Magazine book editor Teresa Weaver, wife and novelist Cassandra King, and the incomparable Pat Conroy. If you'll get us just a moment while we get hooked up, and hopefully you have written questions for later on the note cards. If you still have them at your chair, we'll pick them up a little bit later, and we'll get to those in just a second.
Some exciting news. We just found out backstage that Pat's book is going to be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list next Sunday. And on a lot of other lists as well, but that's Publishers Weekly, Barnes & Noble. Am I forgetting any?
You know, my wife just heard this. I did not.
So you haven't gotten the official word yet?
Obviously she bragged to you.
Yes, she did. First thing she said.
All major list is what I heard.
Okay.
From it.
So welcome to Atlanta. Are you happy to be here?
Delighted to be here. I was born here.
I know you were. Do you get back much?
You know, I get back to become ensconced in traffic. It seems like the inferno to me, but it's the Atlanta life now, the Atlanta experience.
Now, before we even talk about your new novel, is it true that you're working on a novel set in Atlanta?
Working on a novel set in Atlanta. And I can't wait. I have to tell you, I've been excited about it since they signed me up for it. And it's one of those cities that seems ripe for a novel. It seems, when Tom Wolfe, I read, Anne River Siddons, different people have tried it. And I'm anxious to see what Atlanta looks like if it comes through my pen.
Have you started yet? Or is it?
I started taking notes, but I started taking notes in about 1973.
So you're right on pace.
Yes,
Right?
there's no question.
Now, your fans are very loyal and they're very patient, to say the least, but it really doesn't take you 14 years
My
to write a
fans
novel.
are very old.
But you had 2 books out since the last novel, so how long does it actually take you to write a novel?
Generally about 5 years.
And that's about what you think it should be?
I would like it to be 3 months. I have people I know, writers that I know. For instance, I'm married to one, and it seems to me like she turns one out every 3.5 weeks. But she writes quickly, and Ann Siddons writes quickly, and I thought Paul Hemphill did, and I envy that. I don't have it. I can't seem to do that.
Do you still write in longhand?
Yes, I do.
And tell us why that is.
Well, I can tell you exactly what it is. I can also tell you that I was taught longhand in the city at Sacred Heart School. And I was taught by a nun called Sister Bridget when I was in kindergarten. And I kept writing by hand because that's the only thing that I could do until I got to high school. And I took a typing course in Mrs. Dennis's typing class at Buford High School. My father heard about it. He called me over to the squadron, the only time I've been in Dad's squadron. And I walked in and I stood at attention. And Dad, loving and paternal man that he was, said, he looks up at me and he says, "Eddie, son." So I went into the Eddie's position, which strikes me as ridiculous, a ridiculous childhood now. He looks up and he said, "What's this crap about you taking typing?" And I said, "Dad, I thought it'd be good when I filled out fitness reports for my Marines." And Dad said, he looked at me with disgust and he said, "Son, women type, corporals type. You'll be flying a fighter jet. You don't have to type." That decision of my father's cost me more money than any decision made by my parents in my lifetime.
And you never thought about learning later?
I went to the Citadel. I could major in bazooka. I could major in flamethrower. We didn't have many typing courses up there.
Now, I interviewed you a couple of years ago when you were coming through town, and you gave me, I've interviewed hundreds of authors over the years, and you gave me the best quote an author has ever given me. A little bit of, we were talking about what it's like to live in a house with 2 practicing novelists. And you said, talking about Cassandra's work ethic and the way that she writes a book, I'll walk by her room and hear her cackle with laughter at some funny line she's written. I've never cackled with laughter at a single line I've ever written. None of it has given me any pleasure. She writes with pleasure and joy, and I sit there in gloom and darkness. Is that true?
What an accurate description. I like that a lot. Yeah, I don't know why that is. Sandra has a different relationship to her books than I do. And, I've never heard of anybody typing, ha, 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 and yuck, 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 yuck. And I don't do that. I don't sit there, oh, what a riot I am, like that. It doesn't hit me in the same way. But it does her. And I hear the laughter, and I hear the keys going, a million words per minute. And it is simply astonishing to me.
How did you meet him, Sandra? I should make you go off stage and not hear this.
Just my lucky day, I guess. No. He came to Birmingham to give a talk. I was living in Birmingham at the time. To get one of his many awards. And you want me to brag about that one? And so I went to the reception for him. I was a school teacher at the time. I was teaching in college, so I couldn't afford the ticket to go meet him and hear him talk. I remember now it cost $35, and that was not in my budget. But
You get a husband?
I wasn't shopping, I promise. But I did go to the reception afterwards because a friend had invited me, and met him at the reception afterwards.
Now, do y'all read each other's writing now as you're working on things?
Not always as we're working on these. Usually it will be at a certain point. And I might have something I want Pat to read over and see if he thinks the scene works or if the characters, coming across or whatever like that. I will ask him to read stuff, and then I will. One reason I'm reading Pat's now, talking about the handwriting, is before we can take it to a typist, I go over it and write above it, sort of translate his handwriting to make sure that she can, the woman that we have that's typing it now, can read it. So I do get a sneak preview that way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about South Abroad. You're back in Charleston, which obviously you love that city. What is it about it that's so special to you, that's in your head so much?
Well, I went to the Citadel there, and because of my mother and her incredible cheapness, I went to that city without a dime, and I existed in that city without a dime. So I had to figure out ways to, I wanted to be a writer when I went there. So I had to figure out ways to, and I was under the influence of Thomas Wolfe. And I read how Thomas Wolfe saw Brooklyn, and he broodingly walked the streets. So I would broodingly walk the streets of Charleston. And I'd try to memorize everything. But some wonderful things happened on those walks. I watched a family grow up in those 4 years. I'd see them, they eat breakfast every Sunday. And I would go and I'd watch them and Charleston's a great place for secret observers. I'd go there and I'd see this family, and the young woman there, and she was a doll. I saw her when she graduated from college. So they had a little party for her in this thing, and I watched it. And then later, by accident, I walked by this same house. She was getting married. And I watched her, come out the front door and, get in the carriage and go in. And I followed the carriage. And she was married in St. Michael's. And so I felt like I vicariously and secretly fell in love with the city without the city knowing. And, I know a lot of y'all have been to Charleston. I used to never see anything like it. Although we know in Atlanta, there's a South Abroad in every city you go into in America. In Atlanta, Buckhead, nada. And I always go, I learned this early. Where you live? I live in Buckhead. And that would tell me a story. But there were different societies among Jews, among black people. We have a way of segregating ourselves, even in Atlanta, maybe especially in Atlanta. And I got to watch that for a long, long time.
Yeah. Now, do you read reviews of your books?
Of course not.
Even the good ones?
I don't care if they say I am Shakespeare. In very early, I came up with things. I read reviews, I think, for The Water's Wide. And the bad ones almost killed me, and the good ones didn't seem good enough. So I decided, what do I get out of this? Now, what has been amazing to me is I have friends of mine who are writers who check Amazon and their blogs each day. And it seems to me the meanest people in America are commenting on these blogs. Somebody said, but I always know how I'm doing. My best friends or my wife or my children will tell me exactly word for word what somebody said who hated my book. But I get this one thing of And I said, okay, the blog world is too tough for me. And it went out that I had diabetes. And one blogger writes in, and my best friend, of course, showed it to me and had memorized it. And he said, and the guy said, well, soon he's going to have his legs cut off and he'll be circling the toilet in his bathroom. I said, all right, this I did not need to hear on a Monday morning or any other morning. So I try to keep removed from that. Sandra reads all hers.
No, I don't.
No, you don't?
No, I don't. That's one of the main things I have learned from Pat. I did it first, and it was the same thing. I get my feelings hurt so bad, I would cry, cuss, and everything else. And so Pat said, don't read your reviews, don't read the good ones, don't read the bad ones, because you would just be up and down, and that's one thing that I've learned.
Yeah. Now, some of the most beautiful passages in this new novel are about Hurricane Hugo, oddly enough. Were you there? Were you on Fripp Island when Hugo hit?
With Hugo?
Yeah.
I had just bought our house on Fripp Island and was going to San Francisco, was moving out to San Francisco. And I was watching CNN in Atlanta. And I'm looking, and of course, Hugo looked on the screen like the largest thing. It looked like Asia was moving toward the south. I get off in San Francisco. I run for the TV station, and it said, a weatherman was on it. He said, in our latest report, we are told by our weathermen that Hugo will strike land at a place called Fripp Island, South Carolina. So I said, my God, that house is gone. It veered north, hit Charleston. 3 days later, the National Guard let people in. So I went to visit friends in Charleston, see if they're okay, see if they made it through the storm. And I saw people in shock. I saw people walking around like zombies. And the one house I described, Ed and Kitty Holt lived there. And I saw the carcasses of fish all over the yard, crabs, shrimp. And they had been in the house, they'd given a party. And they said, this house has been here for 200 years. It's survived all kinds of storms. And they gave a party, and they were drinking hard liquor when they looked over at the windows and the doors, and water started rushing up. And they just got a few of the older people and sick people up the stairs, and they watched all night, candelabras, as the water rose. And they kept watching it because they were going to have to go for the attic. And it finally got up almost to them on the top floor when it started going down. So it made a huge impression on me, but I did not see it.
Yeah. Now, there's a very tight circle of friends in this book that's at the heart of the plot. Do you have that kind of circle of friends? Do you have...
It's... I've had good ones. A couple of them are here tonight. Cliff Grauber has been one of those friends who ran the old Air bookshop. And Larry Woods is here. And I've had these people, and I never can figure this out, but they're people friends you make, especially in Atlanta. Here's how you make friends in Atlanta. You only make friends with those people whose kids play soccer with your kids. And, I had no idea this would be, but I had this summer, my daughter Megan came down to Fripp Island, and I think 4 of her soccer team came with her, and I got to watch this go play out another generation. But the people that we started out with, Ann Rivers Siddons, writing together, Paul Hemphill, Paul Darcy Bowles is here. And these people were people that I loved over the years and cherished. And I'm always interested in the ones that fall away and the ones that decide to make the journey.
Now, the biggest surprise for me with this novel was the character of a really loving father, of all things. How did that happen?
Well, I wanted to prove that I was capable of writing fiction. And, you know, I'd written about this bear cat. I mean, and my father drove me crazy. He hated the Great Santini. A lot of people here lived with me through Santini, where I give it to Dad, and I have not told my mother or father that I'm writing a book about them. Why, I don't know. So the book comes to the house, and my wife Barbara and I, and Barbara said, "You've got to get this to your mom and dad." So I called Dad up, who's living in the Darlings Apartments. That's where the population of Atlanta is, on Peachtree Street. And Dad comes over, and he sees the book. He says, "My God, this is the greatest day of my life." And I said, "Dad, I'd read it before you said that." And he thought, my oldest son writes a book, and he calls me by my name in the Marine Corps, the Great Santini, and he's loved it. And then he opens it up, and I've dedicated the book to my mother and father. Somebody in Beaufort made me put Dad's name in there. I wasn't going to dedicate nothing to him. But she made me put it. I said, "Thank God." And Dad says, "You dedicated this book to your loving father." And I said, "Dad, you need to read this book." So Dad goes off. He reads, he's hurling it up, and like a baby, he's tossing it up. So an hour later, I get this phone call from Dad. "Why do you hate me, son?" I said, "Dad, keep reading. If you don't mind, just keep reading." And he kept reading. 2.5 hours later, he called up, and he's crying. So I said, "Okay, Dad, there are a couple of parts, I knew that would upset you." And he's just weeping. And later, I heard he threw the book across the room, stomped it, and he disappeared for 3 days. And his mother and father called me up and says, "Nice going, Pat. Your father committed suicide." And, I was concerned about this. But then Dad got with it. Now, Mom had a different tack. I sent it to Mom. She was getting a divorce from my father. She took it to her divorce judge. She hands it to him and says, "It's all there, Your Honor. There's no need. None of us have to testify. No need to call witnesses." So it was a terrible time in my life, but, I got through it.
But the father's a great character in this book. He is this.
He's a nice man.
Yeah, he's a great guy and very lovable. And is that?
It wasn't from experience; it was from observation.
Okay. Now, and also along with the sweet father, there are of course suicides and murders and pedophiles and a hurricane, AIDS, one psycho killer. Am I forgetting anything? So it's still very much a Pat Conroy novel.
Yes, all my favorite things.
Are you a happy man?
Teresa, this is your first interview, isn't it? I would not. When I think of happy men, I think of people like Pinky Lee, bouncing, and no, I don't feel, overwhelmed with joy. Sandra is much sunnier than I am. She dances as a house. I see her picking roses in the garden and stuff like that. This is not the way I have, gotten through life. And so I've looked at life, and life has been much tougher than I thought it was going to be. And I thought it was going to be tough. But, I didn't know my mother would die, my father would die, that my friends would die, their kids would die. I just didn't understand the full gravity of everything that life could throw at you.
And is that in chapter 1, your narrator says, fate comes at you cat-footed, unavoidable, and bloodthirsty. Is that him talking, or is that kind of you? It kind of sounds like you share some of that.
Yeah, that's kind of me. I wish it wasn't, but that is, sort of the way that I have looked at the world.
How does your family react now when you write a book? Do they get nervous before you publish a novel?
They grow suicidal. No, they are. And I'm writing a book now, a nonfiction book, about the change in my father. And, of course, there's going to be a chapter on each of my brothers and sisters.
Oh, dear.
And all of them hyperventilate when I give them this news. And my sister Carol, who's a poet in New York, has gone, she's completely flipped over this. But, it's to me, it's a fascinating family, an interesting family.
I think to a lot of people it's a fascinating family.
When I hear about happy families, this happened to me in Riches. I said this on some program I was on today. And I've said it a lot. One of my favorite things was signing at Riches out at Lenox, when there was such a thing as Riches. And I was signing The Prince of Tides. Okay, and this couple come out. I always like this. And Atlanta is filled with these couples. And I love them. And this couple came out, and I couldn't tell if the man was more beautiful than the woman. Just, that combed look. They had, she had hair like a golden retriever, and he had eyes of a Weimaraner. And they came up to the table, and they were going through the Prince of Tides, and the guy said, they were talking to him. I was asking them questions, and they were president of the sorority and fraternity they'd been to at University of Georgia. Of course. And so I said, that's great. What a nice life and a happy life. And they agreed that they had lived, charmed and delightful. So then the man asked me a question. He says, I've read your book. He says, boy, your family's crazy. Boy, your family's nuts. I said, yeah, they are. I said, how's your family, pal? Oh, my family's great, my family. Tell me the truth. Now that we're in this discussion, and y'all can figure it out yourself as you're sitting there. How far do I have to go in your family history till I meet the first wacko? Mom, dad, brother, sister, aunt, uncle. This woman finally couldn't take it any longer, and she says, his mother's nuts. And so that is simply, the way I feel the world is.
Yeah. What is the relationship now with your siblings? Are you in touch with them all?
Okay, my sister Carol hates me.
Okay. Check.
My brother Mike does not speak to me, but it's only because he's quiet. I don't think he has any... my sister Kathy has become delightful, and she married the only redneck in the Conroy family, so I have to deal with her husband, Bobby Joe Harvey. And my brother Jim, we call him the dark one. He's,
Wow.
No, I look like Tinkerbell, and I said, yeah. And then we have my brother Tim, who is the soft one in the family, the delight of the family. And then my brother Tom committed suicide. But I get along, I think, fine with him. This book has unsettled them. There's no question about it.
Have they read it? Do you know?
They're not going to read it until it is out.
How would you describe your writing style?
I would describe it florid, overdone, pretentious, and show off.
Anything else?
Ornate, baroque.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've read all those in some reviews over the years. But, you have avid fans. I mean, people. This is a publishing event when you have a novel come out, especially any book at all, but a novel especially. Do you feel that connection with your readers?
I do. It's miraculous to me. I was born in Atlanta. My grandmother, Stanny, went to third grade. My grandfather went to third grade. They were from Piedmont, Alabama. My mother grew up here. I think she went to high school here. I think she graduated, but I don't know. And I have no idea, but the thing with readers has been a shock to me. I published my own first book. And I felt wonderful about that. And it was the only time I've ever shaken hands with the guys who printed my book. And it was a very personal, wonderful experience. It was only later that I found out I had betrayed myself by doing Vanity Press. But I had a great time with them. The readers have come slowly, but they've come.
Would you have continued teaching, do you think, if you hadn't been a writer?
I'm sure I would have continued teaching. I don't know how for long.
Were you good at it?
Yeah, I wasn't bad.
Did you enjoy it?
I adored it. The novel I'm going to write after the Atlanta novel. I have never written about the 2 years I taught at Beaufort High School. My friend Bernie Shine calls those the lost years. And they were 2 of the happiest years of my life. And I came out of the Citadel a shy kid. And I did not know I was funny, and I did not know I had a good personality. Those kids I taught at Beaufort High School roared at everything I said. They obviously liked me, and they made me feel like I had something to give just on a personal level. And it surprised me.
Now, you talk about the Citadel. It's an interesting relationship you've had with that institution over the years, and you've come around.
It's been very warm and cozy. It's been fuzzy.
But now you have a cousin there, is this right, who coaches basketball?
My first cousin, Ed Conroy, is now the head basketball coach.
So you are more welcome there than you were at one point.
It happened after the girls came. I thought I could not get in trouble with the Citadel like I did when I wrote the Lords of Discipline. I thought, okay, I have emptied that well. Then when I came out for women going to the Citadel, the Lords of Discipline was like nothing. Death threats poured in. And I did not think that it would ever recover from that. And, guys wanted to beat me up. Why do you want to destroy our college? And Nancy Mace is here tonight. She's our first graduate.
Yeah, do you know where she is? I think people would love to
Where's
see her.
Nancy? Are you around, Nancy? Or you skip out on me? Nancy came to get books signed before. Okay, where is she?
No, that's not her. She was here earlier but had a toddler, so she might have had to leave. Now, South of Broad focuses on there's a terrifying plot line that runs through it. The killer. I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't read the book yet, but that's some really scary stuff, and that's kind of unusual for you, isn't it?
You never met Dad, did you? It is. One thing is, I lived in Atlanta, and if y'all notice in Atlanta, every once in a while, some killer gets loose, beyond human belief to me. I was there when those kids were getting thrown off bridges, and I remember I always waved to kids at school buses, at bus stops, and I waved to a kid, and it was a little black kid, about 8 years old, and I waved to him, and he looks at me, and of course all that was going on, and he runs like hell. And I thought he should run at that time. That Atlanta seemed paranoid at that time. Don O'Brien, who just came back, and I'm looking at the evening news, and my friend Don O'Brien, who's the book editor of the Atlanta paper, is pistol whipped in a parking lot.
A block from the newspaper.
And the guy wanted to throw him into a trunk, and I think Don would never have survived if he'd gotten in that trunk. So, I just watch these things, and they happen in Beaufort. Serial killers in South Carolina. My mother discovered a guy that ran a gas station in Beaufort. And she called me up, told me to come over, rush over, and she had found him decapitated. And it was the first real lead that the authorities had. A serial killer was loose in South Carolina. And they eventually found him, I think, 8 bodies later. So it just had been a type that was interested in me, and I always wondered, are they fathers? Are they husbands? What is it with these people? So I threw one into this book, just for kicks.
He's terrifying. Do you, Cassandra, does he give you much writing advice when you're working on your stuff?
He will, but, if I ask.
If you ask.
know, he won't volunteer, but if I ask, he's been so mostly helpful with not specific writing things, it's more, as I was saying, about don't read your reviews, or this is what to expect on a tour, or when you go to this place to speak, you can expect this and that and the other, because Pat's been doing this his whole life, our whole adult life, and so there's been most everything that's happened to a writer, has happened to him. He knows the ropes, and it's been invaluable to me. It's been really wonderful to have.
What are you working on now? Another novel?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on another novel.
Pornography.
Oh, okay. We don't want to talk about that, huh?
No, Pat always does this to me, folks. We will meet someone, and they will say, "Oh, I understand you write as well." And Pat says, "Yes, but I write Christian fiction, and my wife writes pornography." He's a mess.
But you're working on a novel right now?
I am. I'm working on a novel. I've been working on it for a while. It was supposed to have come out this January. There's a little problem with it coming out this January, being that I hadn't finished it. So
Now, did he teach you how to miss deadlines?
Evidently, I've been hanging around him too long because this one is way overdue. So I'm still working on it.
Now, what is your writing process? When y'all are both working on something, you have your own separate rooms that you work in? And,
yes. Yeah.
And you're in there happily typing along and
Laughing at myself,
Right.
cracking myself up. Yeah.
Do you write every day, Pat?
No. I write when I can. And I bet everybody in this room has found out life is busier than they thought it would be. Just it's amazing to me what comes on. I'll wake up and Sandra will be on a tour and says, "Listen for the Orkin Man." And you listen for the Orkin Man, and at Fripp Island, South Carolina, he shows up the next month. But there's always seems to be something that, will cut into the writing. Make sure that you don't write. It takes a half hour for us to go to the grocery store. We have to drive a half hour to get there. So there's always stuff that, comes up to brew. Also, Sandra did not tell me when we got married that she had been married before.
She didn't tell you.
And she did not tell me that she had 3 sorry sons. And they showed up on the front porch right after we were married. And they have thrown this incredible monkey wrench. They bring hundreds of kids. The first year we were married, I would go out, and she has not told me that one of her sons was going to be bringing home a band to spend the night. So I walk out, not knowing anything, and I see something move in the living room. And I walk in, and there were 8 guys on the floor, and I counted 12 tattoos that I could see. But it's when you have family, and, my daughters bring, it's certainly, it has certainly been instructive, if nothing else, but it's always, the writing we have to, just fit in.
You have to make time.
Do you do a lot of revising, or when you write something, is it pretty much how you want it to be?
When I write it down, it has to, I'm making commitments.
Really?
Where Sandra, when she writes, the first chapter will become the last. The computer, she fires paragraphs over her shoulder. They end up in the 3rd chapter. I have to look at that. Am I sure? Let me read it in my mind before I do it. Let me put it down. and let me kind of like it right now.
Seriously, sentence by
Yeah.
sentence. And
Yeah.
It's been fascinating, Teresa, to me, the observation I had observing, when Pat and I first married and so forth, and he would, say something like, "You mean you finished that book? I haven't even started," or something like that. And it took me a while to realize that, and I've told him this before, I think we probably write at about the same pace, and that he writes about the same pace as other writers, even though he doesn't think he does. But he writes so much of it here that by the time he does put it down, that is what would, to me, be the draft that I hand in. By the time I've gone through so many drafts, and by the time Pat gets it down on paper, that ends up being the draft that his editor sees.
that's really unusual way to work, I think.
It is.
But it's worked for you, right?
I'm sorry?
It's worked for you, obviously.
Yes, so far.
Now, when you talk about all these other projects you have in mind, though, do you just kind of keep notes and have them percolating?
Yeah, I certainly keep notes, and I have been writing about things that happened in Atlanta that were interesting to me, and people that I met in Atlanta, and that always amazed me about Atlanta. I could be in Beaufort, and I could meet 100 dopes a week. But Atlanta's one of those places where you meet 100 smart people a week. You meet people that, I'm going to Atlanta, try out the big city, see what I can do. When I came to Atlanta, I went to Gene and Gabe's, and I kept going back there because I loved the food so much and didn't know enough to try another restaurant. And it was, now I come back and I try to figure out which restaurants are still here. And it's usually things like the Colonnade, Merrimack, and Pity Pat's Porch. But most of the restaurants that I loved in my years in Atlanta are gone now, are memories now. And Atlanta has that. Many of the people I met here have gone away, moved away. And there's a great sense of flux to me in Atlanta that I've felt almost nowhere else in the South.
Really?
And then being married in Atlanta is a fascinating thing. And I was counting the number of people that stayed married, and that was a rare group. They form a dignified line to the left, and I just keep weaving these stories in and out, and I love these stories, and I love these Atlanta neighborhoods. And I can't wait to write about Cliff Grauber and the disgusting bachelor life he lived in Atlanta for so many years. Where's Cliff? There's Cliff. Hey.
Now, can you give us any clues about that book, what it's going to be, like when it's going to be set? Will it be contemporary?
I'm sure, I lived in Ansley Park one time. I'm sure Ansley Park is going to be there. I've even wanted to call it Ansley Park. And I went nuts over that neighborhood when I was a kid. And just loved everything about it. Lived in Brookwood Hills. Lived over in the Emory area. And Atlanta's a city of beautiful neighborhoods today. And I remember when the housing market went crazy here. And now as I was driving around today, I saw something I never thought I'd see in Atlanta. I saw hundreds of empty condominiums. Yeah. I could not believe how many had been built and were still empty. And this is another part of Atlanta. I never thought I would see a recession in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah. Now, speaking of old Atlanta, years ago, you were negotiating a deal to write a sequel to Gone with the Wind. I know you're a big fan of that book. What happened with that deal?
Okay, they made a mistake with me right away. The Margaret Mitchell estate wanted very much me to sign a document saying I would not write about miscegenation or homosexuality. So I said, I can't do that. I just, And, then it became, this. And I said, look, I can't do it. And my sister's gay. What I do to her, she doesn't like me anyway. And, suddenly I won't write about homosexuality. And I've got a nephew who's black. So I'm not doing it to him. And I even did a first line. I said, if you make me try to sign this again, here's the first line of Gone with the Wind, my sequel. After they had made love, Rhett Butler looked at Ashley Wilkes. And said, Ashley, did I ever tell you my grandparents were black? But my sense of humor did not go over well, and it just, eventually broke down. And the reason I wanted to do it is my mother's favorite book. She loved the book, read it to me when I was 5 years old. My father was in Korea, and we were living on Rosedale Road. I was going to Sacred Heart School. And she read me that book with the passion, and I just loved her when she read that book to me. And she explained each character and told me who in our family were like that character. And it was the first time I knew there was a relationship between life and art. And I thought, here's how ridiculous my mother's thing was with Gone with the Wind. My mother dies at 59, destroys her family. Her kids are prostrate at her funeral. She's a kid. She's so beautiful and vivacious. And at her funeral, my stepfather, John Egan, comes up to me, and he was a military guy, so I know this. And he said, I'd like you to check over what is going on her tombstone. I want to get your permission to validate the truth of everything. So I look at the thing. I'm through tears. I'm bawling. And I look at it, and it said, Frances Margaret Conroy. And I said, John, Mom was not named Margaret. And he said, yes, she was. I said, John, she's my mother, okay? I've got a birth certificate. Her name is Frances Dorothy Peake. He argues with me. He said, why does she call herself Peggy? I asked her sister, and her sister told me that Mom went to the Gone with the Wind opening and loved Peggy Mitchell, Margaret Mitchell, so much she adopted her name.
Wow.
So I thought if I could write a sequel to Gone with the Wind and try to make it a work of art, and say this sequel to Gone with the Wind is dedicated to Peggy Conroy, my life would not have been in vain.
Yeah. That's nice. Now, your mother, you give a lot of credit to her for instilling your love of reading and
she's
books.
wonderful on that.
Do you remember the first books that really made an impression on you?
I'm sorry?
The first books that made an impression on you?
Hardy
you really,
Boys.
Yeah.
She hit me with all those young ones. And then she started hitting me with, part of this book is when I was in ninth grade, Mom got this thing that even though she could not afford to send me to the great colleges, she would learn and give me the great books. So when I was in ninth grade, she gave me Ulysses by James Joyce. So I read this thing, and I think, this is the worst book I've ever picked up in my life. And Mom would insist, keep reading it, son. It's the greatest novel of this century. I said, Mom, I don't understand one word. And she said, it's based on the Odyssey. I said, that's great. I read the Odyssey and I loved it. Where's Cyclops? When does he come in? But it was one of those things, my mother wanted us educated. She wanted us smart. She wanted us to love writing like she did. And the only horrible mistake she made with me is that ridiculous Ulysses, which I was at Cliff Grabart's bookstore early in my life in Atlanta, and there was a Joyce scholar looking at it, and he was picking up Finnegan's Wake. So I asked the guy, You read that book? He said, oh, yes, I have written articles on this book. I'm a Joyce scholar. And I said, so you like it? And he looks at me and he says, I think it's the funniest book ever written in English language. And he became my definition of a dope from there on. I mean, I just could not believe that.
Well, and you get back at him in this book, right?
Yes.
Make all your points about Ulysses. But when did you know very young that you were a writer, that that's what you should do, that you were a writer, that that's what you wanted to do?
You know, it was hard for me. You know, I couldn't say I was a writer. I actually tell you, I felt pretend, hi, I'm a writer. And it felt funny to the mouth. And hello, I'm an author. And I used to try to say different things so it wouldn't sound ridiculous. And finally, after the Lord's discipline, I got where I could say, I'm a writer. I write books. But it took a long time. I was in my 30s when that happened. When did that happen for you?
I was kind of the same way. It was hard to identify yourself as a writer, call yourself a writer. My great-grandfather had published a book, and he was sort of considered a dreamer and a fool because he'd rather write than be farming. So I wasn't. I was brought up in a house of books and people reading and so forth, but it wasn't a career, especially for my generation, for that much for a female. But in spite of that, I sort of kept the faith. I kept saying, I know that one day I'm going to be a writer. But I said it to myself. It was a secret dream of mine.
Yeah. Now, are you both big readers? What have you read lately that you love?
Oh goodness. I read, I'm late on this because I've been working on my own book. I actually just read one of my favorite writers, Richard Russo, and I just read Bridge of Sighs, and just last week got his new book and can't wait to read that. And I finally got into a book I've been dying to get into, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, Barbara Kingsolver. Loved that. And then when I hear people talking about books that are going around now are popular, and friends of mine said, oh, you just got to read such and such. So I heard everybody talking about this young woman that's written this book that's become very popular called The Help. And, I loved it. And that's kind of the way my reading will go. Just, have a stack all the time.
You read anything lately you love?
It's my favorite book's by Cassandra King.
Well done.
And I read them over and over again. I never get tired. No, it is. Cliff's Old New York Bookshop was, to me, a college education. I went there, and I realized the books of the entire world were going to go through his shop. And it was my job to intercept them, and Cliff's job to make me pay for them. And I just could not believe I was lucky enough as a 25-year-old man to discover I did not own one hardbound book when I walked in the Cliff store. And, I think I own 10,000 now. And they're the most beautiful decoration, this beautiful furniture to me, but I love reading them. I love what they say. And I love it when people tell me about a book that I need to read. And I picked up when I was in New York, Richard Russo's new book, and John Irving has a new book. And I discovered John in 1978 in Atlanta when The World According to Garp came out. And I've kept up with that boy.
Well, do you think you'll ever read on a Kindle?
I'm sorry?
Will you ever read on a Kindle or an e-book?
I saw one of those things, and Sandra, I said, what's that? And she said, that's a Kindle. And, this is, I can't type. I'm not really computer. I'm not very good at that. But it seems to me, if I look at this honestly, they have a very good product, and it looks like it's here to stay. And to my complete shock, somebody showed me my website, which I'd never seen before. And on it said, buy Kindle books by Pat Conroy. I said, I had no idea. I was on Kindle. And I said, who sold the rights? And it certainly wasn't me, but, they do it somehow.
Well, I know that the President and Mrs. Carter have said that the one book that they wrote together was probably the hardest thing that they had working together. Would that be difficult for the two of you? Instead of working on your own projects separately?
It probably would be, because I don't think I've ever collaborated, with anyone on writing a book. So it probably would be.
We've been asked to do a sequel to Lady Chatterley's Lover. When she was a Methodist minister's wife.
Mr. Conroy, when you develop an idea for a book, do you first develop the theme of the book, or do you work mostly on the characters and then let the characters play it out?
Generally it's one idea will hit me that I want to write about. And this book is a friend of mine. Well, he's a teacher of mine. He taught me chemistry in high school, and then he was a colleague of mine when I went back to Beaufort High School. And he surprised me by asking me to be in his wedding the summer after the first year I was teaching. And I said, Walt, I thought you were gay. He said, yeah, so did everybody. Don't worry about it. And he says, I've been waiting for my sweetheart to become available. His sweetheart was a Catholic nun who was getting released from her vows. She came to teach in the high school, and a lovely, fabulous woman. He told me the story of their courtship. And they'd fall in love when they were 18, planned to get married, dated all through high school. She came to him at the end of the high school year and said, I think I have a vocation. I've been called to the convent. He drove her up there and tried to talk her out of it the whole way up. But she went into convent, stayed 18 years, did extraordinarily well. Came out, and I was going to Europe, so I could not be in that wedding, but I am the godfather of their first child, Walt. I said, you don't know me well enough to make me your godfather. He says, Pat, you're the only Roman Catholic I know in the world. So I always loved that love story, and I've tried to get in every book I've ever written.
One of our visitors said, do you still love the opening paragraph of The Prince of Tides?
Do I still love it? Yeah. Now you talk about, now see, this is a part of me. Someone was getting on me about the way I wrote. The overwriting, the purple prose. And I said, look, I could write like this, and you wouldn't bother me. I could say, golly gee, Charleston sure is a pretty city. But it doesn't quite do it for me. It doesn't make me feel the way I feel about Charleston. When I was writing The Prince of Tides, I was trying to figure out a first line. And I came up, my wound is geography. It is also my anchorage. It's my port of call. It's what makes me tick. And so I liked that, and I went with that. And, let that first line lead me into the first part of the prologue. And I still like that and cannot help it and would not change it.
How difficult is it for you to come up with words like that. I remember the columnist Leonard Pitts said he would anguish over the right words to express exactly what he feels. Is it that difficult for you?
You know, I found some letters I wrote to my English teacher, Jane Norris, recently. I've been writing this stupid way since I was in high school. And it's embarrassing, you know. It's, you know, I looked at these letters. I said, my God, I had the disease even then. And poor Miss Norris said, why did I give you Thomas Wolfe? I should have given you Hemingway. And he tried his whole life to change me. I mean, he really made an effort to change it. But it was too late. By the time he got me, it already, this, you know, long-windedness had gotten me. And it's, but now it is as natural to me as drawing breath. I cannot help it.
The Water is Wide was required summer reading for the North Atlanta High School freshmen this year. What's the lesson these young people should take from your book? What is the lesson that young people who are at North Atlanta High, they require the reading of that book. What lesson should they take from that?
Okay, the lesson they should get is never become the white school teacher the first year they integrate a school in the American South. That did not work out. And, you know, I was raised like everybody was raised in separate but equal schools. And so I get there the first day, and these kids don't know what country they live in, and I'm talking to these kids, they don't know what island, what ocean washed up on their island, they never heard of the president, So I write to the superintendent that day, don't do this. I write to the superintendent of schools and said, Dear Dr. Trammell, this school is a garbage dump. This school is a disgrace to all South Carolinians, all Southerners. It makes a lie after the separate but equal thing, and we must recognize this. And I'm just letting you know the first day, because we have failed every single one of these kids disastrously. It took 9 months for him to fire me, but he was pretty efficient when he did.
What is the worst piece of advice anyone has ever given you about your writing and the writing process?
The worst piece of advice anybody ever gave me. Sandra.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. That's a very interesting question, because usually you hear what is the best, advice you ever heard. What is the worst piece of advice? I can't think of.
Maybe it's the teacher who advised you to change your writing style.
I can't think of any advice people gave me that I thought was bad that I took. For whatever reason. And, certainly lots of people have told me, tone it down. I remember Bill Deal, who's a friend of mine in Atlanta, told me I needed to quit looking at my navel. And he wanted me to write crime books. And so I didn't, but, I don't quite know what to do. I don't tell anybody else how to write. And I don't offer them advice at all. Annie Siddon sometimes will give me her book after she finished. And, generally she just wants me to give whatever I can to make the book better. And that's what I try to do. I try to do that with Sandra. But I'm not much of one to critique a book. And some people are savage when they do that. It's in The Prince of Tides, just happened to me with 2 or 3 novelists. I gave the book to them, and they came back and they said, this should be 12 novels. This should be 15 novels. This should not be 1 novel. And they were adamant with it. But, didn't seem right to me, so I didn't do it.
You mentioned that you were hesitant to call yourself a writer for some time. Is the writing life anything like you expected it to be?
Okay, I didn't hear one of those.
Okay, is the writing life...
Okay, no, this is not your fault. It's a microphone, and I have hearing aids, and I just cannot... It reverberates.
Is the writing life what you expected it to be?
Is my writing life what I expected it to be? No, it isn't. I expected it to be an abject failure. I did not think I'd ever publish. I'm like everyone. There'll be 100 people in this audience who wanted to be writers, who've tried to be writers, who are still trying to be writers. They felt the same way I did, that they would write and it would lead to nothing. It would lead to despair. They would send it off. They'd give it to their friends. So I never, ever thought this would happen. I mean, it's a shock to me. I went to the Citadel. This is not a birthplace of novelists in the United States. My father, when he read novels, he moved his lips. He used his index finger. I did not come out of, the educated family that I would have wanted. I would have loved the Buckhead family. There's Pat Buckhead. And I would have liked that a lot because I could have seen things up close that I did not get to see. I would have had an education, after Pat's. But my name wouldn't be Pat. And it wouldn't be Conroy. It would be Rutledge Ravenel.
Buckhead.
And I would have this wonderful name with this wonderful background. And I would be filled with social confidence that I'd never got filled with. And, I can dream and fantasize about that life, but I became the writer I was supposed to become. And I was born to the people I was supposed to be born to.
Now, Pat, somebody's asking, how difficult was it for you to balance life as an athlete and a writer when you were growing up?
I'm sorry?
How difficult was it to balance life as an athlete and a writer when you were growing up?
Well, I was such a sorry athlete that it was not difficult at all. I mean, I was an English major at the Citadel, where I played basketball and baseball. And to be an English major at the Citadel was an open admission. I was gay. And we only there were about 5 or 6 of us. And I remember the upperclassmen said, "My God, what do you want to do to me, boy?" And, and I simply was stunned by that. But here's what the Citadel did for me. When I wrote poems and short stories for their literary magazine, I felt Miltonic in my power because I was the only one doing it. And, I enjoyed doing it. My teachers naturally thought I was terrific. They'd never had somebody do this. They never had somebody say they wanted to be a writer. So I had, great support from them. But being an athlete, my coach went nuts when I wrote about a basketball coach my senior year. And it was my first indication of what you need to be careful when you write about different characters. And in this one, my coach was a very lean, powerful man. Okay, I thought I was getting away with it I made him 300 pounds. And I thought it was horribly funny. His name was Lean John Tanner. And I thought this was witty beyond belief. And it just stunk. It was just awful. But, you have to start like this. You have to do something like it. And I was writing about athletics because I knew about that world. And I started off with that world.
Now, I'm not sure you're going to know this. When does the trade paperback reissue of The Water is Wide come out?
When is a trade paperback?
Of The Water is Wide?
I didn't know it was coming out.
I think it is.
Is it soon?
Yeah, I think it's coming out soon.
Because apparently in the audience is the teacher who wrote the essay and the reader's guide questions for it. So, sorry, we don't know when it's coming out. I'm not sure that makes any sense. August 11th was James Joyce's first publication. Did you pick this date for publication of South Abroad?
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Did you know that? August 11th was James Joyce's first publication date. Did you know that?
Of course. Are you kidding me?
My bad. I think we've kind of answered this already. Do you work on more than one writing project at a time? Do you have more than one book going at one time?
I do now. I've gotten old enough where I have been slaughtered on this trip with, this is your first novel in 14 years. What have you been doing? And I think, and I've got to write fast. I just can't, I have to do it. And so I've forbidden any of Sandra's sons to visit us. I've forbidden any of Megan's soccer team to come down and see us, with their hundreds of children. But I've got to write books faster because I have things I want to say before I go.
Now, as an author, have you been pleased with the film versions?
I've been delighted. Here's what I'm pleased with that I didn't know about. This has been a shock to me. I didn't know, the films would buy books. And, first of all, I've been shocked by how much money they paid me. And I just thought, holy God. And then I get to hang around people much better looking than I am for a long period of time. And it's interesting to see what some other interpretation of your book is. It took me with Barbara Streisand. And I can't pretend, meeting Barbara Streisand, I can't pretend, yes, I meet people like Barbara constantly. I mean, we're very close, we're very tight. But I was getting in the Atlanta airport. Dad drove me out there. I was going to work with her for 3 weeks on the script of Prince of Tides. And as my father drives me there, I'm getting out, and he says, son, I hear Barbara eats writers alive. And I said, Dad, I want to thank you once more for helping my career limp along. So I went to Barbara's apartment, nice apartment, by the way, in New York. She answered the door. It surprised me. And I told her what my father had said. And I said, Barbara, if you're mean to me, or you yell at me, or you hurt my feelings, I'm going to quit writing and spend the rest of my life making fun of you and causing people to laugh at you. And she said, how long has your father known me? And I said, that's a great answer. She could not have been nicer. She's wonderful. And I enjoyed that whole experience.
Yeah. And The Lords of Discipline, did you like that movie?
The movie did not work for me because they did not have the love story. It was too tough. I had the Citadel, eating freshmen alive, and I didn't think it worked for that reason.
Okay, here's from a beloved son of South Carolina. Are you a Gamecock or a Tiger fan?
Am I?
Are you a Gamecock or Tiger fan?
I wish both teams would die a natural death.
Oh, my.
It is now, being a Clemson fan, okay, Don O'Brien, here's Clemson guy. I have loved baiting Clemson fans my entire career. And, I talk about their room temperature IQs. I've just had a ball making fun of them. But here's how serious that is. When I wrote The Prince of Tides, I had Tom Wingo play football, college football. And in the first version, I have him play for Clemson because it seemed natural. That family would send the kid to Clemson. My brothers, all Gamecocks, said they would not talk to me, would not see me, would not come visit, and would not come to my funeral unless I made him a Gamecock. Wow. So I had to go through, this is the stupidest thing a writer ever had to do. I had to go through, every time I said Clemson, I put South Carolina. Every time I put Tigers, I put Gamecocks. So in this ridiculous book, Tom Wingo now scores the winning touchdown for Carolina against the Clemson Tigers. And this is the silly state I have moved to on purpose.
Is this a good time to tell you that I graduated from the University of South Carolina?
Yeah, I couldn't be sorry. You have my fullest, deepest sympathy.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for joining us. Congratulations on your latest bestseller.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
And we want to thank you for being here. We hope you will pick up a list of other authors that we have coming, and we hope you will join us again in October as the Carter Museum reopens. It's a wonderful museum. Let's give Pat Conroy one more.